what kind of value can customer success get from the signals that are seen in support, right? And this is obviously given that support talks to your customers more than anyone else at your organization. It's definitely, and as a result, there's a wealth of information in those interactions. And the worst thing that can happen to a CSM is to walk into a conversation with a customer completely blindsided about the fact that that the world is already on fire and not knowing about it. And depending on how closely your CSM teams work with your support teams, this can absolutely happen. At SupportLogic, obviously, given that this is our whole value proposition, I work very, very closely with my support team. However, even then, the last thing I want to do is spend all my time reading through support tickets. And SupportLogic very much highlights the ones that are important to me for my book of business so that I can stay on top of it. So that's a little bit of a high level of what we're going to talk about and look at today. But to give a bit more about myself, I've been a CSM for right, Stephen. Yeah, I've been a CSM for the last about 8 years now, 7 or 8 years, and I've been working in the support technology space at the different organizations and companies I've worked at for about 10 years. So this stuff is very near and dear to my heart. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and share out my screen and talk a little bit about what we do, what SupportLogic does, and why it's so valuable. So for those who don't know, and I think most folks have a little bit of an idea if you had the pleasure of coming to our booth last week, unless you were playing Space Invaders and Dig Dug the whole time, which was certainly an option. SupportLogic is very much a natural language processing and ML driven, in a sense, analyzer of all of your support cases, right? Reads them end to end. We're talking every single comment, every single internal note, all the communications, and reading that and extracting voice of the customer from it. So distinct signals that we might detect on cases. And as I mentioned, this is super critical for the simple reason that support talks to your customers more than anyone else. So before I jump into some very specific use cases for customer success, it's important to note that, right, some of the types of signals that we're looking at, that we're categorizing across your customer conversations, range from very procedural language that customers might use, which are things like what you're seeing here. And wonder if I can zoom a little bit more here so that we can. Yeah, okay, there we go. So very procedural language. Something like here, you'll see this is a signal we categorize as critical issue. Customers saying that they have a serious issue, maybe their system is down, something like that. Things like an escalation request when they're explicitly asking for an escalation. Follow-up requests or asking for updates again and again, or just expressing urgency, as well as a number of others, right? We have another one, production issue, and also call requests is a common one that we see as well. And the long and short of it is that some of these signals can be super valuable even to me as a CSM. And while I'm not going to spend all this time necessarily in this platform going through the cases one by one, right? There are situations where I want to be alerted. And when I'm alerted, it can draw me into here. And we'll touch on that a little bit more in a moment. But so these are some of those procedural language type signals. I call them procedural language because they're not emotional language. But your customers express emotional language in support cases as well. And so we categorize those slightly differently, right? Baseline negative sentiment, which is kind of a catch-all for pretty kind of for relatively standard language of a customer saying that they're upset or worried or things of that nature. Frustration, right? It's also pretty self-explanatory, but frustration actually correlates extremely closely with very, very poor CSAT scores. More so than any other negative signal that we detect, if one of your customers is getting frustrated in their engagement with support, that will typically start us on the path towards an escalation that will make its way often back to me through it being surfaced to, say, an exec sponsor that I work with at one of my customers. It's happened on more than one occasion for me, though it happens less now that I'm leveraging SupportLogic for this in this capacity. So number of signals there, right? We look for profanity, right? We look for impatience, confusion, super valuable. Confusion is interesting because it's valuable, not just, it's valuable in a number of ways, right? Perhaps your customer is confused about how to use your product in certain ways. This creates the opportunity to look at enablement for your customers, which is definitely it's a monetization opportunity potentially, or it's simply an opportunity to drive more adoption. And more adoption typically leads to more growth and potentially expansion, creates revenue opportunities. So these signals can be really leveraged in a number of ways to assist in kind of making these decisions and understanding these things. Okay, so that's the 20,000 foot view, I would say, of SupportLogic, signal extraction, and the individual signals as well that we look for in our analysis. So let's take it a step further to think in terms of, how do I use this day to day? Right? I don't need another UI, honestly, to live in. I live in a lot of UIs already, right? So the beauty of what SupportLogic does is it allows me to set up alerts to alert me in some of these scenarios via my messaging channel of choice. At SupportLogic, we use Slack for this purpose, right? So they're you can be very customized in the types of alerts that you build. There's scenarios here that I absolutely want to be notified. So if I jump over to, say, our alerting page, I can configure alerts when my specific book of business and cases associated with those customers within my book of business are showing that the customer are showing negative sentiment from the customer, or an escalation being predicted. I absolutely need to know these things before I'm getting on a call with one of my customers. And so I have some of these alerts set up. And I'll actually show you a little bit of what some of these look like within Slack. And this is obviously, it's not just available in Slack, it's available in MS Teams as well. And I'm going to switch my share real quickly here. Here's a few examples of the types of alerts that I can get, right? So here's a really interesting one. Here's a case and can I zoom again here? Yeah, there we go. Right. So here's an example of a case for, let's say, a customer. This is Kansas City Chiefs. It's a football team, obviously, not one of my real customers, but you'll see here, it's telling me that a case from this customer is likely to escalate. And it highlights some of the key contributing factors to that so that I know what's going on, right? It actually is showing me that the account health is bad. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and how SupportLogic calculates that momentarily. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that when we're talking about support signals, account health is really the support health of a customer. Super critical because, as I mentioned, our support team talks to our customers more than anyone else. We have these sentiment scores and attention scores. Sentiment score denoting how customers are really feeling about a case. And a neutral sentiment score is about 70. So as it's trending down below that, you'll see we color coded as yellow. Yellow isn't, the worst thing just yet, but if it continues down below about 30, it's going to get into the red, right? And that usually means that we've detected a number of those negative sentiment type signals on it. And then the needs attention score is based heavily on those procedural signals that I was talking about, but also based on, is my team responding to this customer? So this is just one example of an alert, right? And you can configure these alerts. Obviously, I don't want to be notified for every single customer of SupportLogic, right? I need to just be notified for my book of business. I manage about 14 accounts here at SupportLogic, and so I can't be reading all the cases for those accounts. And I don't have not only do I not have time for that, it's not a good use of my time. I'm a CSM, which means that my activities really need to be those of action, right? I have outcomes that I'm trying to make sure that customers achieve. But on more than one occasion, worked with a customer over my career, and because of how many support issues are open, they don't want to talk about outcomes. They just want their problems fixed, their problems resolved. So, okay. So as mentioned, here's an example, right? You'll see some other alerts here, right? This one is specifically for a high needs attention score, suggesting that this case needs, really does need attention. I can always click for additional details there. But I think the key thing here, once again, showing me account health, shows me the case owner, right? Because that can be important, because if one of my key stakeholders has gotten involved in this case or has even opened a case, I've actually had situations where I've seen an executive sponsor of mine open a case, right? And I can have alerts configured specifically when those individuals open cases. And I've done that before so that I know. So another great way for me to stay apprised of what's going on in support without actually looking at the tickets, right? I can just see them be highlighted, have them highlighted to me from here in alerting capacity. And if I really want to know more beyond that, I do have the option to click one of these and actually go directly into the case in SupportLogic and see the details. I think actually if I were to jump back here, and this is going to take me back into SupportLogic, where I can actually see the details of the case. Ryan, can you confirm, are we looking at SupportLogic now? Did we shift from Slack to SupportLogic?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You're on the Detroit Lions case.
Awesome. So this is just a little bit of what's possible, right? But I think one of the key things we mentioned, right, was that I mentioned just a second ago was account health and how account health is calculated. So we look at the support experience as a whole, and we're able to generate this support, call it account health, call it support health score, right? Which I think is a little bit more accurate. That gives me an idea of the customer's current experience and support. It's more than just the case sentiment, which on this particular customer we can see is trending down, has trended down across their cases over the last 30 days, and is actually pretty low. 33 is not great, right? But it also tells me how many escalations has my customer had open recently, right? What's their typical case age? And is that getting better? Is it getting worse? How many tickets does my customer have open that have defects tied to them, engineering issues tied to them? Because that's a totally different conversation, right? My customer is opening a lot of cases, asking how-to questions. That's great. They're engaged, right? But if they're opening a lot of cases that have defects tied to them, that's really problematic, right? It means that maybe our engineering team is not addressing issues in a timely fashion, not solving for bugs, right? The last thing I want to do is have a conversation with my key stakeholders where they're basically telling me, your product just doesn't work, right? That's really problematic to me. So a lot of great insights here that roll up into this calculation of this account health score and give me that snapshot that I need. Also, how I also use this? I use this for QBRs, and I hate the term QBR, right? SupportLogic, we typically refer to them as outcome reviews, right? Because the CSM's job is about helping a customer achieve their outcomes. But I like to include as a slide in my presentations to customers on those reviews, I like to include what I know to be their support experience with SupportLogic. I like to validate that with them, right? And being able to do that with actual data, conclusive data that I can share with them can be super valuable, right? And it also allows me not just to, right, ideally I'm presenting a very positive health score with positive results, and positive outcomes that the customer's having, but being able to keep track of this and be alerted on it allows me to also proactively escalate situations, right? Allows me to reach out to a customer proactively, reach out to one of my exec sponsors, which I have done before based on these details, just to tell them that I know that there's a serious problem. I am ensuring that all hands are on deck at SupportLogic. working to address this problem. And I can often do this. And in this actual scenario, I let my exec sponsor know this before his team let him know this. Right. And you could look at it two ways. Maybe I don't want to, maybe I don't want to, maybe the situation would have gotten resolved before the exec sponsor found out about it. But I'd rather be proactive, let them know that we're on top of it, that we take their business seriously. So this is, I went on kind of a lengthy monologue there, but I think that gives a good picture of what we do, not just at a high level, but at a kind of a more detailed level, right? Sentiments, alerting, account health, actionable information that can be passed to a CSM via Slack, via MS Teams, via email, via a number of other channels, so that I can very much take an action based on this information to ensure that my key customers are in a good spot, right? Because maybe a renewal is coming up, maybe I'm working an expansion opportunity, all these things. Let me stop there. That was extensive.
Max, that was awesome. Thank you for that tour and sharing these things. We've got a couple of questions in the chat here. Jordan's got two questions for you.
I know Jordan.
Yeah. Yeah,
Jordan,
Zywave's a customer of ours. Yeah.
Zywave's a customer of ours, and Jordan, nice to see you. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, Jordan, one of the things we were showing and talking about at Pulse last week is our Gainsight integration, right? We do have a Gainsight integration that injects certain of these signals directly into Gainsight, right? Into the timeline, as well as, so that calls to action can be created, right? So that account health can be shown in Gainsight, right? So we absolutely have that capability right now. I think I chatted with your I don't want to say your boss, but I think your boss, Sean, at Gainsight about this at the Pulse conference last week about this specifically, right? And some of these other key things. So yeah, super valuable. To your other question, Jordan, about the account health score alerts. Still working explicitly on those, right? Expect to have that come together this quarter fully. So
Yeah, thanks, Max. You're right. It's like we have some flexibility with that timeline, custom object. There's different ways that that these alerts, these sentiment signals can come into Gainsight. So that's a really cool thing that we're doing. It doesn't look like we have any other questions going on in the
let
chat.
me
Yeah.
let me touch on one other thing, right?
Yeah.
I know that not everybody, and even not everybody at Pulse when we were there last week, actually uses Gainsight, right? There's a number of other CS platforms that companies use, Tatango, Vitali. There's a lot of them, right? I think it's super important to note, while we are working towards direct integrations with some of those, I think Tatango is the next one on the list. But our CS integrations, our Gainsight integration, and all these others, they're built off of our events API, which is our alerting API. And so technically, right, and that's an external facing API that can be used to generate all of these signals that we're putting into, say, Gainsight, for example. So there's absolutely the opportunity to even before these direct integrations have been built, to leverage those and push them into other platforms. I see, Emma, I see a question from you. What's the typical timeline for implementation for SupportLogic, right? And yeah, so while it does depend somewhat on the complexity of your CRM instance, we can typically do it in 30 to 45 days, right? 30 days, assuming it's not super complex. And every CRM instance, every ticketing system is a little bit different, right? Every company I've worked for, like some of them, they have a legacy Salesforce instance that's more than 10 years old, that's massively complex, and some it's a lot, it's a bit newer, and their hygiene's a bit better. But 30 to 45 days is what I would typically quote to be safe. Susan, good question. Thanks for the question about HubSpot. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So our underlying architecture is Snowflake DB. Snowflake is a Snowflake database, right? So case data and case schemas, while they're a little different across across different ticketing systems, they're also very, very similar. So as long as that data can be ingested via either ETL process or any connector that you use, which basically means any ticketing system from any ticketing system, we can get it into our Snowflake, and then we can map it. Then we can map that data to surface within our UI so that it can be as well so that it can be analyzed by our ML and our NLP to leverage some of these alerts in this account health. So yes, absolutely. Our underlying architecture, it's CRM and ticketing system agnostic. We can work with anything. Yeah, you're very welcome. Another thing, yeah. So we covered so much already and some great questions. Let me show you another thing, though. Right, super valuable thing that I do use in SupportLogic is basically I build a cohort of customers. Right, so this is our My Customers page. It allows me to see a quick snapshot of all of my accounts and their current support experience. Allows me to see the account health, attention and sentiment scores, how many cases do they have open, like how many escalations do they have open. Just gives me a quick glance at what's going on, right? What's the distribution of some of these, right? What's the age of them? This is super valuable just for me to quickly check. And I might do this. I don't do this every day, right? But I'll absolutely check within the platform and look at this view for my accounts once a week, right? The rest of the time, I'm often relying on the alerts to tell me when I need to either pop into our platform and take a look, or just to keep me apprised of what's going on. And that's happening throughout the week on a daily basis, right? But you can configure your alerts to be really targeted. Obviously, if you're a digital CSM, right, and you manage 100 accounts or 150 accounts, you don't want to be getting alerts for all of those on a daily basis, right? So you can configure those alerts for very specific conditions. Maybe you have maybe you have digital CS accounts that are coming up for renewal, or that you're working opportunities on, or anything of that nature. The alerts allow you to be very focused and just be alerted in situations that matter. Awesome. Any other questions?
Yeah, if we don't have any more questions, Max, thank you for this amazing tour. It looks like Steven's got a question on manager
Stephen.
view. Yeah.
Yes, yes, Stephen. This our product is built for the support product, the SupportLogic product was built for managers. So this is absolutely these are intended as manager views, but what you can do is if you're looking to see a much in a sense a higher level view, right? I'm looking at individual accounts here, but because I create cohorts, right? If I'm a director of CS or a VP of CS and I want to see a more of a roll up, I can absolutely do that, right? You see, I expanded this, for example, but I could roll it up in this way and just have, okay, here's my APAC customers. Here's my EMEA customers. Here's my US customers, right? Or here's my customers that are using this particular product. Right? You can build these cohorts in any capacity that you like. And then you can also, obviously, we have extensive analytics within our product, very much geared more towards support, but also allowing you to say, look, for example, right? Maybe I have across the different products that my company offers, there's been a spike, for example, in number of cases associated with that. And like it could happen if we had like a release or something, and I can search for those types of insights within SupportLogic, but also be alerted, right? I didn't talk about keyword alerts, but you can absolutely create keyword alerts based on, say, your competitor names, right? So if your cohort of accounts or any of your customers, your top revenue customers, are ever talking about a competitor in support, you can absolutely be alerted in that scenario as well.
Max, can you show Steven real quick that agent view at the top? He's in customer support actually, and I think that view is powerful. Yeah.
This one. Yeah. Yeah. So Stephen, this is the my agents view. And what I do with this is I can create a full entry for my team, but also for individual agents. And you'll see it's a heat map. And it's basically looking at my cases grouped by status, but also grouped by age, also grouped by inactivity. So I can know if my team members, I can know which cases have actually been inactive, meaning no inbound or outbound communication for the for in this scenario greater than 7 days. And you see these are also color coded by the sentiment. So the ones that are red, not only have these cases been inactive, but the customer's not happy. And stale cases are the bane of any support team's existence, right? They clog up your backlog, make it seem like your agents and engineers are like have less bandwidth than they actually do. So there's a ton of great insights that you can derive from that to use in a tactical way as well.